You found the Backup Wrap Up, your go to podcast for all things backup, recovery, and cyber recovery. You know what? No one cares about your backup speed. That's right, I said it. Sure, when designing your backup system, backup speed does matter. But you know what really counts? Recovery speed. That's what keeps you employed. I've got some wild stories about how I learned this particular lesson the hard way, including that time at Motorola when I discovered that my tape drives could write but couldn't read. That was fun. Join Persona and I as we dig into why recovery testing matters more than bragging about your backup speeds, and why you should probably start doing some of it before you actually need to. Trust me on this one, you don't want to learn this lesson the way I did. By the way, if you don't know who I am, I'm W. Curtis Preston, aka Mr. Backup, and I've been passionate about this topic for over 30 years, ever since I had to tell my boss that we had no backups of the production database that we had just lost. I don't want that to happen to you, and that's why I do this. On this podcast, we turn unappreciated backup admins into cyber recovery heroes. This is the Backup Wrap Up. Welcome to the show. Hi, I'm W. Curtis Preston, aka Mr. Backup, and I have with me a guy who wishes he had my new coffee machine, Persona Maliandi. How's it going, Persona?
I'm good. I'm good, Curtis. So, I actually don't wish for your coffee machine because there's two reasons.
Okay.
One, I don't have space to put a coffee maker without tossing something off the kitchen counter. And two, I really need to cut back on the caffeine. Like at work, we get coffee, and I try not to have more than one a day. And on Wednesdays, we have someone come who makes coffee, and I get one single shot latte to start with. And before they're done for the day, I get an iced oat milk with like a half a shot. And they laugh at me. They're like, how much is a half a shot? This much?
That is so funny.
Because I like the taste. So
no, I still think you wish you could have it.
I know it would be bad for me.
You don't. Yeah, you know it'd be bad for you. Yeah.
So how are you enjoying your new fancy coffee machine?
Yeah, so I've made like 3 espressos with it so far. I have a Nespresso, by the way. I've kind of always thought about getting one, and I finally bought it. But with you know how your feed is tailored to stuff that you do. Yeah. This morning, the first thing that greeted me when I woke up is Nespresso is changing their prices. Increasing the cost of their pods. You're
like, great! I just invested in it.
Yeah, and also there was a thing on Reddit about it was a picture of what a UPS place looks like from the Nespresso pod recycling program. Let's just say it's a hot mess.
Yeah.
They are doing it. It's just that it's logistically a challenge.
It's a challenge. Well, and it's also like, I think sometimes they're like, oh, separate out your bottles and plastic, or your plastics and trash. And it's like the cost to actually recycle properly is so high. I wonder if they're just like, yep, we'll take it and we're just going to burn it all.
I think they're doing it, but there is this thing about like that there is the belief that they give you these bags. They give you a free bag that if you just put your stuff in there, you can drop it off at UPS and they'll just take it, right? And they're saying you're supposed to fill it up to this line, but not beyond the line. And the belief is that if you don't fill it up to that line, the cost to ship that bag is less than what they're able to recycle out of the bag. But
wait,
anyway,
so they want you to fill up to at least the line.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, but if you go too far over the line, there's issues. But there was an incident.
I want to hear about. Let me guess. So let me guess what the incident is. You try to put a pod in when a pod was already in there and everything exploded.
No, it takes care of all that. All you have to do is open it, and it automatically removes the old pod. But the way the one that I bought, it comes with a tower O water.
Yes.
Right. So, and it's detachable. So, like, by the way, the kitchen counter problem, I solved that by having this in my office. So this is the tower of water for those of you watching it on YouTube, and it literally just, I'm holding it in my hand, and then I can put it over here, and you notice that there's this little slot.
Yeah.
You see that? And so that tells where to go. But literally, you just pop it on there. So I might have just knocked it right over, like,
and all that water just like spilled everywhere.
Yeah, and that's a good 32 ounces at least, maybe even more. And I just dumped the entire thing on the floor, literally 5 minutes after putting it in, because I have it. I have a better place for it long term, but where it's at right now is a bit precarious. And I literally 5 minutes after having it here, I dumped that entire thing on the floor and had to mop up like crazy. And I mean, there's power cords down there.
I was actually worried about your power strips and power cords and
there's some bricks down there, some power bricks and things like that.
Those are waterproof.
Yeah, so it was just a big watery mess. But anyway, so let's chat a bit. I have. Do you think the title is clickbait?
That's the first thing I told you before we started this recording. I was like, that's a little bit clickbait, isn't it?
Yeah. No one cares about your backup speed, right? And let's just
which
talk
is very
about,
similar to what we've talked about before, which is no one cares about your backups.
Yeah, no one cares about your backup. You one of the things that you've heard me say on a repeated basis is that no one wants to be the backup admin, right? No one grows up to be the backup admin, and no one is in IT going, I hate my job as a network admin. I'd really much rather be the backup person, right? No one has ever said that in the history of time. Many people have said, God, I hate my job in backup, and I can't wait to become a real sysadmin. And I mean that. I love all of you, my backup people. You are me. I am you. I'm just saying that it is a tough job. And one of the reasons is that no one cares about your backup.
Yeah.
They only care about the restore, right? No one cares about the millions of backups that you got right. They only care about the one restore that you got wrong. And what's that?
So going along what you're saying, though, I think people don't grow up to be backup admins, but I think there's a way to make backup sexy. Like, I'm just imagining in my head, like, it's Superman, right? It's Clark Kent is backup.
Uh-huh.
And Superman is restore, saving the day. Right? Because you are the hero, right? If you think about it, you are the hero. You are the one who saves the company and brings things back up.
So for the YouTube audience, I am backup guy, right?
Yes, Mr. Backup.
Restore man. Restore man.
And
backup guy.
And for our listeners who are listening to this via podcast, Curtis, between those two sentences, just took off his glasses and then put them back
on. And I'm like a totally different guy. I mean, it worked for Superman, right? That is just the funniest. I've always been amused by that.
But here's what I'm thinking. Sorry, I know this is off topic a bit, but I think backup people need to start thinking differently, right? I think if you think I'm a backup person, right? I don't think you're giving yourself enough credit for how important you are in the organization. Backup is a means to an end. You are really the recovery person.
Yeah, and that's why, the tagline of the show, we say that we turn unappreciated backup admins into cyber recovery heroes, right? Absolutely. I am on board for you, or I am on board with you. Having said that, let's go back to the title of the episode, which is No One Cares About Your Backup Speed, okay? But
everyone talks about backup speed all the time.
Yeah. When do we talk about it? We talk about it when we're designing the backup system, when we're working with the vendor
speeds and
to
feeds.
Design the backup system. And yeah, speeds of feeds. And I'd say this is, we don't focus on it as much today as we did back in the day, because back in the day you had a number. You're like, I have 18 terabytes and I got to get 18 terabytes from here to there full once a week. And therefore there's some math that has to happen. I got to transfer. I'm going to spread I got 18 terabytes. I'm going to pick a better number, 21 terabytes. So I'm going to do yeah, right. Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to do 3 terabytes a night. And that means I need a network, I need server, and I need storage, tape or disk drives that are capable of receiving 3 terabytes a night, plus, let's say 10% of the remaining terabytes, which would be another roughly 2 terabytes. So I need a system that's capable of receiving 5 terabytes a night. Backup speed mattered so very much when that was the way you did backup. Now, I think mainly the concern is that obviously we need enough time in order to get the backup done. But and I will say this, so I'll disagree with the title first before we get into the reason why I actually strongly believe in this statement. If your backup is not finishing within a reasonable amount of time, within what we refer to as the backup window, what do we call the backup window?
Your backup window is the time in which you have to finish a backup. Typically, it's when resources are idle, or as an example, you might say, I have 8 hours during normal business days, Monday through Friday, to get a backup done. Maybe I have all weekend because people aren't actively using the system. Yeah, exactly. And historically, the reason why the backup window, and this is why another reason why we focused so much on backup speed back in the day, which was backup was really hard on the servers. It was a significant performance impact on the servers when you were running a backup. And so therefore, really the only time you could do it was when no one else was using the servers. Yep. And so you were given a window. Back in the day, I remember that my window started at like 10 o'clock at night, and I needed to be done by 6 in the morning, which meant I had 8 hours. That was my backup window. And that meant that I had to do those, we came up with 5 terabytes. I had to do those 5 terabytes within 8 hours, which, what? 3.
Well, 3 plus the 2, remember? The 3 terabyte of full plus 2 terabytes from the 10% of the, don't you remember that part? Yeah.
Yeah.
So I need to do those 5 terabytes within 8 hours, which means I need to do almost a terabyte an hour, which back in the day was a real challenge, right? I remember the first time I saw a headline that somebody was able to achieve a terabyte an hour of backup. Back then, like if you couldn't do that, you just couldn't get your backup done within the window, and therefore you weren't going to get your backup done.
But I think still arguing or against the title, right, is I think because backup speeds have improved and technology has made it more efficient, which I know we haven't talked about yet, but that has also allowed us to reduce the backup window from, say, once a day, 8 hours.
Yep.
Or your backup frequency, I should say, from once a day down to, say, every 4 hours, with less impact on your server and everything else. And so you're able to take it more frequently and give yourself better protection.
I would actually say that the first thing that it did was it actually blew out the backup window. Yeah. Because we can do backups and they don't significantly impact the performance of the server. Hopefully, depending on your backup, you may actually, depending on the server, depending on the backup, you may still, if you're still, for example, if you're doing database backups and you're still required to do full and incremental backups, those could still have a significant performance impact on the server. But everything else where we're doing either some type of block level incremental or some type of source side deduplication, where the performance impact of an individual backup on a server is relatively nil, which means that you could do it pretty much any time of day. And that means that as long as you do it within 24 hours, then that's fine. And then I would I completely agree with you that in some cases, we've then said, hey, because the backup is so quick, we can actually do it more often than the quintessential once a day.
Yeah.
We could do it, every 4 hours, every hour, every 5 minutes. There are backups that some, different ones take every 5 minutes. And we can therefore have a much tighter RPO. What is that?
Recovery point objective.
Right, exactly. So if back in the day, your backup frequency was once a day, then your RPA, your recovery point actual, a lot of people use the term RPO to mean RPA. RPO is the objective. It's the SLA.
Desired. Yeah.
The RPA is the actual capabilities of your system. So if your backup is once every 24 hours, then the best RPA you're going to get is likely 24 hours. Yeah. You could actually get 48 hours if a backup fails, for example, right? But if we can do a backup in 30 seconds with minimal impact to a server, you could do it 4 times a day, like you said earlier, and we could get a much tighter RPA.
But I think the one other thing to mention is, and you brought it up too, is with databases, you still have to do fulls and incrementals. Sorry, fulls.
Most databases, yeah.
Right? And I think that's where backup speed still plays a part, especially as databases are growing in size. You still need to be able to back that up within the window. So having backups that can go really fast is still a good thing. Or if a new application comes online.
Yeah. But even then, like the DBA, he or she just assumes that you're going to get the backup done.
Yeah.
No one's going to be impressed. Hey, I figured out how to back up your data. My backup's really fast, and now it runs in only 4 hours. No one cares.
Yeah.
Right? Going back to the title, no one cares. You got the backup done really fast. No one cares. Right?
Yep.
Now, I will say this.
Well, no one cares as long as they're able to meet those windows. Yes.
No one cares that you can do it.
Yeah.
They will care very much if you cannot do it, right? And that's where I was about to head, and that is the one concern, because, as you've heard me say before, I've spent my entire career fighting the laws of physics, right? And so even though we have reduced down to the smallest possible increment, I think, in terms of the size of each individual incremental backup, when you do block level incremental or you do source ID duplication, you're basically transferring the smallest amount of data from the server to the whatever it is that you're backing up that could possibly be transferred. Even though we have done that, you add up all the servers, that's a certain number of gigabytes or terabytes or petabytes that must be transferred within a particular period of time. And so still, what matters very much is bandwidth.
Yes.
Right? And unlike, again, back in the day, if we ran the numbers and the problem was the network, we could just build another network. Right. And that's what I used to do when I remember the first time I did this. And these were, do you remember Sun E450s? Do you remember those servers?
Were those weren't the Sunrays, were they?
No, they were like the size and shape of like a dorm refrigerator.
Okay.
Right. And the thing about the E450s that was amazing was that they had the great PCI slots. And they had multiple like full speed PCI slots. And so what you could do is you could put multiple
cards.
Ethernet cards in there, and each of them could run at full speed. And back then the dream was to get a gigabit card in there, right?
Yeah.
And so it was super cheap and easy to build a super fast separate network that wouldn't be the backups wouldn't be impacted by production loads, and production loads wouldn't be impacted by backups. The difference now is, in many cases, many of our backups are no longer going over the corporate LAN. They're going over the WAN. They're going over the internet. Yeah. Hopefully, and I really mean this, hopefully you're encrypting that data
Yep.
before you're sending it, right? Since you're sending it out over public networks. But still, backup speed does matter in that you've got to make sure that you have enough bandwidth. You've got to make sure that you've done these calculations and you've figured out the databases that we talked about that are going to need full and incremental backup. Those speeds will very much matter. This is more true with sort of traditional databases, right? RDBMSs, relational database management systems, like Oracle, Sybase, SQL Server, Informix. I haven't heard Informix in a minute, but
when you're talking about bandwidth, right? The other thing that came to mind is, and your Sun E450 example, the other thing that came to mind is there's also a big push these days to make servers dense, right? Virtualization, right? You want to take advantage of those resources rather than leave them sitting. And so you may end up with bottlenecks on those servers that prevent you from actually sending data out. So instead of having 10 servers with 10 network interfaces, now you maybe only have 2, right?
Yeah.
And they can only support a certain amount of bandwidth leaving the system versus those 10 independent systems before.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, so that my bandwidth comment starts at that server and continues on to your LAN, continues on to the WAN, and continues on to the vendor, right? Basically, there could be a bottleneck anywhere along that. And a bottleneck there would mean that your backups would not get done within 24 hours, which would then impact your ability to meet your RPO. So if they don't care about your backup speed, Prasanna, what do they care about?
How quickly does it take to restore your data?
Exactly. How quickly can I get my data back, right? And I, early on in my career, I was as guilty of this as anyone. And that is, it's so easy to basically spend all your time designing the backup system, testing the backup system. Does it have the capability to do what I needed to do? And not really do any restore testing because so first off, let me put out what do you call it? An axiom? Would that be the right word? Just because your system can back up at 1 terabyte an hour does not mean it can restore at 1 terabyte an hour. Why might that be?
Oh, 1,000%. A lot of it, having worked at storage vendors in the past that built deduplicated appliances, a lot of it is the way it writes, especially backup streams. It's very unique, and so you're able to optimize. But when you're reading data out, you have to read every single piece of data in order to restore that application. It's not like, 99% is duplicates. I can just drop it and just send the 1%. Yep. I actually have to read all the data out, and how it's laid out on disk may not be optimized, especially with deduplication and other technologies.
And I have in the past referred to this as the dedupe tax.
Yep.
The difference between if we lay the data down on disk, like without dedupe, and then we lay it down on disk with dedupe, the difference in restore speed between the two is often referred to as, the dedupe tax. And I've seen it be really, really, really bad.
Oh, yeah. Me too.
Yeah.
Yep.
I can think of one vendor, and I'll let them go nameless because they're still around as a vendor. They still sell dedupe appliances. I'm pretty sure they've addressed this issue. But when it first came out, it had a 90% dedupe tax. In that, I remember that the version 1 of the system had the ability to write data at 400 megabytes per second. Its ability to read data was 40 megabytes per second. The aggregate throughput of the entire appliance was only 40 megabytes per second. And it was not good. Yeah. And if you didn't test that, then, you
do you want to talk about
out at the wrong time.
Do you want to talk about your example?
Which one?
The one that you had the test with the compression where it had done it, and you know that one.
Yeah. So, back in the day, back before, like when I used my first commercial backup product, they had a software compression feature that the idea was that this was before I was using tape drive compression. And they had this ability, and it was allowing me to do things that I wouldn't be able to do. And so I chose this as a setup option during my initial setup. And I didn't do restore testing. And then there was a moment when very bad things happened, and I needed to pull my tapes out. I will just say, so I remember running over there and being super excited that I was going to now, I was essentially going into battle with an untested weapon, but whatever. I was super excited. And I remember standing there and firing off the restore, and I remember watching the tape drive going like blink, blink, and then really long period of time, then blink, blink. And what I found out was that when they do compression, the way they do it is literally, for the Unix people in the crowd, they were doing a compress -C they would write it to temp, and then they would write that compressed file to tape. And then when they were restoring it, they would restore that compressed file to temp. Then they would run uncompress in place, not uncompress -C. Like they weren't doing it to standard out. They would uncompress it in temp, and then they would move that file to where it needed to go. And so that's when I learned from the vendor, like, yeah, we don't recommend this feature if speed is important to you.
You're like, where was that anywhere?
Yeah,
in the
where was that in the manual, right? And so there are things that you're not going to know until you do restore testing. So you have to do restore testing. I mean, for one thing, how are you going to know the restore even works? Works at all? I'll tell you another story.
Curtis is full of stories today.
Yeah,
you sure it's not the espresso?
What's that?
Are you sure it's not the Nespresso?
This is an espresso talking. I was actually at the headquarters of Motorola and working with the computer simulation modeling and research division, which was a cutting edge division at the time that was using computers to simulate damage to phones and to improve the design as a result. And I remember that this was the group that basically came up with the StarTAC, right? Which was the phone that put Motorola on the map, right? And I was using their tape drives, and I had their backup system, and I had it going, and everything was was going. And I was a full on admin, but backups was part of my responsibilities. And I'd been there for a few months, and I'd been doing backups, and I just sort of assumed that the backup system that I inherited worked.
Yeah.
And I just remember the first time I went to go do a restore, and what I found is, so these were IBM like 3480, something like that.
Okay.
Old school IBM cartridges. They were really good at writing. They were completely incapable of reading. I really don't remember what the solution to this was. But I remember that I was like, I would kick off the restore, and the restore would always fail because the tape drives couldn't read. And I'm like, man. Like it's like you have two jobs. It's not just one job. You have two jobs. You have write and you have read. You have to do one to do the other, but the other is really, really important. You can't do just the one and not do the other. It reminds me of the Seinfeld episode with the car rental, where he's like, they're like, we don't have a car for you, and he's like, but I had a reservation. And he goes, yes, we understand you have a reservation, but you don't have a car. And he's like, anybody can take the reservations, but the important part is the holding of the reservation. That's the way it is in backup. It's important to back up. It's really important to restore. Yep. I literally have no memory of what the solution to that was, but I definitely remember the day that I went to go do a restore and absolutely nothing.
You're going to wake up at 3 a.m. with it popped in your head.
It was probably a really traumatic event, and I wiped it out of my memory. So go ahead.
But I guess one question is, so I know we talked about restore speeds, newer technologies, newer storage vendors, right? They are addressing this, right? The speeds have improved for restores because there's new use cases in addition to just restoring data, such as instant access and other things where performance does matter. And if you look at some vendors like Fast, right, and other things, they are leveraging Flash more heavily in order to help improve performance. And so I think some parts of that are being addressed, but you still also have like the reading the data out and everything else. And just like trying to get a full copy of the data out is just very expensive.
Yeah, I would say when we talk about dedupe, and I'm a fan of dedupe, it's really important how you write the data, and it's really important what it's like to get that data back en masse, right? It's really easy to just write the bits that you need for a backup. How you write it very much determines how you're going to be able to read it. And so as a result, again, the only way you're going to know that is to do restore testing.
Yep.
The other thing is that when you do restore testing, you have to look at all of the different ways in which and things that you need to restore, right? You need to look at all of the different applications. You need to look at all of the different types of servers and VMs and serverless applications that you might have. And
dependencies.
And dependencies, right?
Active Directory.
Well, then we start talking about disaster recovery, right? When we start talking about disaster recovery, we introduce the concept of a recovery group. What is that?
It's everything that is needed in order to bring up your environment or your application or whatever that object is you are looking to recover.
Right. So let's say you want to restore, even though no one has Exchange anymore, you want to restore your Exchange server, right? Everybody's moved to 365.
Someone's crying in a corner.
I'm gonna get like a bunch of emails from people saying, "Hey man, I still use Exchange." Listen, it's time to move on, people. Anyway, so you want to restore your Exchange server. You have to restore Active Directory, for example, before you do that. And does Exchange it doesn't use SQL underneath, right? No. But there may be an application where you need an application on top of a database. Maybe there's multiple databases. Maybe there's authentication and authorization, and I think is probably the biggest one that is a dependency for most environments. Can you think of anything else like that?
Sometimes even, depending on if anyone's still doing bare metal recoveries, right? Bringing up your host first and your server before you can actually start doing your application, which might be a completely separate recovery process.
Yeah, if you're doing bare metal recovery, which is a term that we used, literally it means you have a piece of metal, you have a box, and it's got nothing on it, and you're going to recover from there. Most people, again, no one does this anymore. And the reason why they don't do it is because they're doing VMware or Hyper-V or any of the other different methods. I don't think anybody's going to be doing VMware anymore. Everybody I talk to that has anything to do with VMware is like, yeah, we're trying to figure out how to move off of VMware thanks to Broadcom. And Broadcom will probably still make money because basically they're like, we're gonna
focus
do
on
a
top
10x.
Yep.
We're only gonna have 5 customers less. We're gonna charge them $10 million each, and we're fine. Totally lost my train of thought.
So the restores.
So no one does bare metal recovery because it's so much easier to do a bare metal recovery or the equivalent of a bare metal recovery when you have a VM. You can back up the VM whole. You just restore that as a file, and boom, you're off to the races.
But remember, even there, you might need to bring back your vCenter instance.
Yes.
Right. And
yes.
everything else.
That's a perfect example of a dependency, right?
Yeah.
If you're going to have to install vCenter, which means hopefully have a backup of the vCenter environment, right? And there's probably an authentication and authorization system to do that. You have to do all of these dependencies. This is why you do recovery testing, and you just create these different scenarios. And I will say that they are going to very much care about your recovery speeds.
Yeah.
They don't care about your backup speed, but they care very much about your recovery speeds. And they really don't care about these dependencies. They're like, look,
that's
all
your
I
problem.
care about is this application. Why is it taking me so long? Well, because I have to restore 37 other servers before I get to restore your application. Did you have were you about to say something?
The one other thing to think about from restore speed perspective is make sure it's realistic what you're looking to test. As an example, you might just test, say, a gigabyte of files or 100 gigabytes of files or one application, right? And that may not actually reflect how the system actually behaves when you're trying to do these massive restores.
Yeah, I completely agree and disagree at the same time. You got to walk before you can run.
Yep.
If you've done no recovery testing, I would highly recommend restoring 10 gigabytes of files.
Yes.
You know who would agree with me right now?
Jeff.
No. Stuart.
Oh, sorry, Stuart. Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
So Stuart very much would have liked to have done a restore of 10 or 20 gigabytes of his data back before he needed to do a restore of 800 gigabytes of data.
Go back and listen to that episode. I think we'll put a link in the show notes.
Yeah, it's a great episode about a true life restore of a basically personal data, but it was 800 gigabytes of personal data, so it was a significant,
And this is by an experienced backup admin.
Yeah, right. A person who'd spent an entire career being a backup admin, but like a lot of people, like he's using cloud backup for his personal data, and he has zero control over how this thing works. He just pushes the button and magic happens, right? And let's just say it wasn't so magic. So you've got to do your restore speed testing. They very much, and I would say start small, work your way up. But I completely agree with you that you want to test, as much as you can, as real as, and that's the beauty of the cloud, is that you can basically push a button, recreate your environment, test the crap out of it, and then delete it, and you just pay for it during the duration. What I don't think you should do is what our friend in Alaska did, and that is delete your entire data center and then test your recovery
We love you,
speed.
Paul.
We do. We love you, Paul. But you did wrong.
Yep.
You made it out. You made it out to the other side. But and we're gonna have you on again soon.
Yeah.
To tell us, what else you've been up to, because that sounds interesting. So no one cares about your backup speed, Persona.
Yeah. They only care about your restores and how long it's going to take for them to get their data back.
I will also say that investigate the idea of restoring in advance.
Yeah.
Backup products support the idea. You mentioned this idea of instant recovery, where you can just literally basically push a button and there's a copy of your data ready to roll that you can just mount. That's a great idea. There are also companies that essentially you create a recovery group and they essentially pre-restore it, on an ongoing basis, so that when you go to do an actual recovery, you can just literally push a button and go.
Yeah.
And that works. That's the only way to have a really fast restore is to have already restored it before you actually need it.
Yep.
And then the other way is snapshots.
Yep.
Right. If you're able to just mount a snapshot and roll, that's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why so many people are fans of doing backups and recoveries that way.
Yep.
All right. Well, thanks for another great chat, Persona.
No, anytime, Curtis. And remember, Only 3 espressos a day, or Americanos. Only 3, Curtis. Only 3.
I've had 2 so far. So I mean, I can go get one.
You're allowed one more.
You know what? You know what's funny is like when you buy a thing, they send you like this
a sleeve.
They send you. So this is what comes with an espresso. These are all the pods, and
that's only the fancy version, by the way. I think after that, when you buy a sleeve, it doesn't come like that.
Yeah. So this pod right here, you know what this one is?
What?
This is a what's the point pod. You know what it is?
Huh.
It's decaf.
Oh, yeah.
Like no, thank you. Alticio decaffeinato.
Yeah, no, thank you. I'm good.
I'm like, what is the point of that? Anyway, well, thanks for listening, folks. You're why we do this, and good luck out there. And that is a wrap. The Backup Wrap-Up is written, recorded, and produced by me, W. Curtis Preston. If you need backup or DR consulting, content generation, or expert witness work, check out backupcentral.com. You can also find links for my O'Reilly books on the same website. Remember, this is an independent podcast, and any opinions that you hear are those of the speaker and not necessarily an employer. Thanks for listening.